The great hall of the Galactic Concord stretched upward like the inside of a massive crystal. Light bent and danced through walls that were not quite solid, casting rainbows across the gathered delegates of 12 ancient species. They had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. They had seen stars born and die. They had conquered disease, hunger, and war. They believed they understood everything worth understanding. Ambassador stood at the center of the hall, feeling very small and very young. Humanity had only discovered faster-than-light travel 40 years ago. They were the members of the conquered, admitted almost as an afterthought. The elder races viewed humans the way adults view children playing at being grown-ups, amusing, harmless, not worth taking seriously. Today needed them to take her seriously. Today, everything depended on it. Honored members of the conquered, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I come before you to deliver a warning from Earth. We urge you, in the strongest possible terms, to abandon your plans to open the Shroud Rift. A ripple of amusement passed through the assembly. The Shroud Rift was a tear in the fabric of space itself, sealed by ancient beings millions of years before any current species existed. The conquered had voted to unseal it, believing it contained vast energy reserves that could power their civilizations for. High Counselor floated forward. They were a being made of pure light, ancient beyond measure, beautiful and terrible to behold. When they spoke, their voice rang like bells. Ambassador said, and could hear the patience one might use with a confused child. The Shroud Rift has been studied for 10,000 years. Our scientists have determined it is safe. The energy within will benefit all species equally. Why does humanity object? Took a deep breath, because something is on the other side. Silence, then laughter, the clicking of mandibles, the grinding of crystalline bodies, the musical chimes of the followers. They were laughing at her, at humanity, at the very idea that these young creatures could know something the elder races did not. Waited for the laughter to stop, then she continued. 6 months ago, Earth launched deep space probes through microfractures in the rift's seal. We wanted to know what was inside before you opened it fully. What we found was not energy. She paused. We found movement. We found patterns. We found something watching us from the other side. The delegate, a massive creature with compound eyes that reflected 1,000 tiny versions of, stepped forward. Their translator rendered their clicking speech into words. Human ambassador speaks of shadows and fears, have explored the darkest regions of space. We have conquered worlds you cannot imagine. There is nothing in the void that frightens us. With respect, said, they have never met anything truly dangerous. None of you have. You have had millions of years of peace. You have forgotten what it means to face something that wants to destroy you. The delegate, a being of living crystal that thought in pure mathematics, pulsed with cool blue light. We have calculated the probability of hostile entities existing within the rift. The chance is 0.003%, statistically insignificant. Human fears are based on emotion, not logic. Felt her frustration building. She had known this would happen. Earth's leaders had warned her that the elder races would not listen, but she had to try. You calculate based on your experience, she said. But your experience is limited to this galaxy, to species that evolved here, to threats you understand. Whatever is behind the rift is not from here. Your calculations mean nothing because you have no data that applies. High Counselor's light flickered with what might have been irritation. Young ambassador, humanity has been part of the galactic community for less than half a century. In that time, you have contributed little beyond your curious tendency toward violence. Your species spent thousands of years killing each other before you reached the stars. Perhaps this experience has made you see threats where none exist. His jaw tightened. There it was, the judgment that always came when humans tried to speak. Your species is violent. Your species is primitive. Your species cannot be trusted to understand the universe as we do. But knew something the elder races had forgotten. Violence was not a weakness. It was a teacher. Humanity had learned things in their bloody history that these peaceful ancients could never understand. They had learned what predators looked like. They had learned how to recognize danger. They had learned that the universe was not kind, and that survival required constant vigilance. "We are violent," admitted. "We have done terrible things to each other. We have nearly destroyed ourselves many times. But because of this, we recognize certain truths that you have forgotten." She looked around the hall, meeting the eyes and sensors and light receptors of every delegate. "We know what it looks like when something is hunting. We know the signs of a predator waiting for its prey. And whatever is behind that rift has been waiting for a very, very long time." The vote was called, watched as each species cast their decision. One by one, they voted to open the rift. The species after species, choosing to ignore the warning of the young humans who had only recently crawled out of their caves. 11-1, the motion passed. High Counselor turned to with something like pity in their luminous form. "The rift will be opened in 3 standard months. Perhaps when humanity has existed for a few million more years, you will learn to see the universe as it truly is. Safe, ordered, under control." Nodded slowly. She had done what she came to do. She had warned them. That was all she could do. As she walked out of the great hall, she activated her personal communicator and sent a single encrypted message back to Earth. The words were simple, but their meaning was vast. They didn't listen. "Activate Protocol Midnight." On Earth, in bunkers hidden deep underground, military commanders received the message and began to move. Factories that had been silent for decades roared back to life. Ships that had been designed but never built began construction. Weapons that humanity had sworn never to create again were pulled from storage and updated with modern technology. The elder races laughed at humanity's fear. Humanity began preparing for war. In the cold depths of space behind the sealed shroud rift, something ancient and hungry felt the first cracks forming in its prison. It had waited for so long, so very, very long, but soon the door would open. And when it did, the galaxy would learn why it had been locked in the first place. 6 months after the shroud rift opened, the galaxy began to go quiet. Commander James stood in the communications center of Earth Station Prime, watching the holographic map of known space flicker and change. Red dots marked worlds that had stopped responding. When he had arrived for his shift 8 hours ago, there had been 17 red dots. Now there were 43. The silence had started near the rift, spreading outward like blood from a wound. First, the scientific stations monitoring the opening went dark. Then the nearby mining colonies. Then entire star systems. No distress calls, no warnings, no explanations. One moment a world was there, full of millions of lives, transmitting and receiving like normal. The next moment, nothing. Any response from the asked, though he already knew the answer. Lieutenant Park shook her head. "Nothing, sir. The last transmission was 72 hours ago. They were reporting unusual energy readings from the rift, and then the signal just stopped." Stared at the map. There were beings of pure logic, living crystals that had existed for millions of years. There was a fortress of mathematical perfection, protected by defensive systems that could calculate and counter any known threat. If something had silenced them, it was something beyond calculation. And though he asked, "Their outer colonies have gone dark. The swarm fleets are pulling back toward their core systems, but we are receiving reports of mass panic. They are saying something is hunting them." Hunting, the word hung in the air like smoke. Activated his secure channel to Earth Command. "This is Station Prime. We need to accelerate Protocol Midnight. Whatever came through that rift is moving faster than we projected." The response came immediately. "Understood, Commander. All colonial evacuations are already. The inner defense line is being fortified. Earth is preparing." At least someone had listened. While the elder races scrambled to understand what was happening, Humanity had spent the last 6 months doing what they did best. They had prepared for the worst. 3 days later, a ship emerged from hyperspace near Earth Station Prime. It was a transport, but something was wrong with it. The hull was scorched, melted in places, as if it had passed through the heart of a star. It drifted without power, tumbling slowly through the void. Led the boarding team himself. They cut through the outer airlock and entered a ship of nightmares. The Wurren species, their bodies covered in hard carapaces that could withstand extreme temperatures and pressures. The ones they found inside the ship were broken, shattered, twisted into shapes that made no biological sense. Some looked like they had tried to tear themselves apart. Others seemed to have simply collapsed, their internal structures dissolved into paste. In the center of the ship, they found one survivor. She was curled in a corner of the cargo bay, her compound eyes dim, her carapace cracked and weeping dark fluid. When approached, she flinched away, making sounds that the translator struggled to render. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now, you're with humans." They looked at him. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she spoke, and her words came out broken and raw. "Safe? No, nowhere safe. They are coming, they are already here." Knelt beside her. What came through the rift? The survivor's body trembled. "We called them the Hollow. They are not creatures. They are not machines. They are the opposite of existence. They are the spaces between stars given form and hunger." "What do they want?" "Everything." The survivor made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "They do not conquer, they do not negotiate, they consume, they ate the first, not their bodies, their minds, the patterns of their thoughts. They tried to calculate a defense, and the Hollow consumed their calculations, learned from them, grew stronger." She paused, gathering strength for what came next. "Then they came for our swarm fleets met them in battle, millions of ships, millions of warriors. We were scattered like dust. Our weapons passed through them like they were not there, but they could touch us. They reached into our ships and took us apart piece by piece, thought by thought." Felt cold spread through his chest. How many survived? "I do not know, perhaps thousands, perhaps none. I was on a refugee transport. We ran. We ran until our engines burned out, until our supplies ran low, until there was nowhere left to run." She looked at him with dying eyes. "I came here because the humans warned us. The humans knew. I thought maybe the humans could help." "We're trying," said. "We've been preparing." The survivor reached out with a broken limb and gripped his arm. Her strength was fading, but her grip was desperate. "The Conquered laughed at you. The High Counselor called you children, said you saw threats where none existed." She pulled him closer. "Is dead now. The Hollow consumed their light, drank their thoughts, left nothing behind but empty space. The Conquered is broken. The elder races are falling." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We should have listened to the humans. We should have listened." She died a few minutes later. Her body collapsed in on itself, as if whatever had touched her was still working its way through her system, unmaking her cell by cell. Stood alone in the cargo bay, surrounded by the dead, and understood that the war had already begun. The galaxy was falling, world by world, species by species, and humanity was the only one who had seen it coming. He returned to Station Prime and sent his report to Earth. The response came within the hour. "All forces to defensive positions. The inner colonies are evacuated. Earth's orbital defense grid is active. The fleet is assembled." There was a pause in the transmission. "Commander, the Hollow will be here within weeks, maybe days. We cannot save the galaxy, but we can make them pay for every inch of space they take." Looked at the map again. The red dots were spreading faster now, reaching toward human space like grasping fingers. "Then let's give them a fight they'll remember," he said. Behind him, the last transmission from the survivor played on loop. Her final words, recorded just before she died, broadcast across human space as a reminder of what they were fighting for. "We should have listened to the humans. We should have listened." In factories across Earth and her colonies, workers built weapons without rest. In training grounds, soldiers drilled for battles against an enemy no one had ever faced. In laboratories, scientists studied every scrap of data from the fallen worlds, searching for any weakness, any hope. Humanity did not know if they could win, but they knew they would not go quietly. The Hollow were coming, and humanity was ready to meet them. Admiral stood on the bridge of the HSS Defiance, flagship of the human fleet, and watched the nebula burn with false colors. The nebula was humanity's chosen battlefield. Its dense clouds of gas and radiation would interfere with sensors and communications. It was not much of an advantage, but it was something. Behind him, 600 human warships held position in perfect formation. It was every combat vessel Earth could gather: destroyers, carriers, battleships, missile platforms, ships built for a war that humanity had hoped would never come but had prepared for anyway. They were not alone. Scattered among the human fleet were the survivors of the elder races, 17 swarm ships, carrying the last warriors of a species that once numbered in the trillions. A single calculation sphere, its crystalline structure pulsing with desperate computations. Refugee vessels from a dozen broken civilizations, their passengers watching through viewports with eyes that had seen their worlds die. Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Wells said from her station, "We are detecting distortions at the edge of the nebula. They're here." Nodded slowly. "All ships battle stations, weapons free on my command." The distortions grew. Space itself seemed to bend and twist, forming shapes that hurt to look at. The Hollow did not travel through space like normal ships. They tore holes in reality and crawled through, bringing the cold emptiness of their dimension with them. Had seen recordings of what these things did. He had watched the swarm fleets scatter like insects before a flame. He had seen fortresses crumble into meaningless static. He knew what his fleet was facing. But humanity had something the elder races never had. They had spent 10,000 years learning how to kill. The elder races tried to fight them with precision, said to his crew. They tried to find elegant solutions, clever strategies, sophisticated weapons. He paused. "We're not going to do that. We're going to do what humans have always done. We're going to throw everything we have at them and see what breaks first." The Hollow emerged from their distortions. They were not ships in any recognizable sense. They were geometries of wrong angles and impossible curves. They were shadows cast by no light. They were the empty spaces between thoughts, given form and terrible purpose. There were thousands of them. The elder race survivors opened fire first. The launched swarms of guided missiles. The sphere projected beams of pure mathematical energy. Plasma bolts and particle beams and weapons that had conquered 1,000 worlds streaked through space toward the enemy. They passed through the Hollow like light through glass. No damage, no effect. The elder weapons simply did not work against beings that existed outside normal physics. "Admiral," Wells said, her voice tight, "the Allied weapons are having no effect." "I know," his voice was calm, "but ours will." He opened a fleet-wide channel. "All human vessels, execute Protocol Prometheus. Let's show these things what happens when you corner a species that evolved by killing everything in its path." The human fleet fired. Nuclear warheads erupted from launch tubes, accelerating toward the Hollow at impossible speeds. Antimatter torpedoes left trails of annihilating energy in their wake. Kinetic impactors, simple chunks of metal accelerated to 90% of light speed, crossed the distance between fleets in seconds. The first wave hit the Hollow. Space turned white. The nuclear fire of a dozen suns bloomed across the nebula. Antimatter met matter in explosions that would have vaporized planets. Kinetic impactors punched through the impossible geometries with the simple, brutal physics of mass times velocity. And for the first time in their long, hungry existence, the Hollow screamed. It was not a sound. It was a ripple through reality itself, a wave of wrong that passed through every ship, every mind, every thought. The Hollow had never felt pain before. They had never encountered anything that could hurt them. They had consumed galaxies, devoured civilizations, ended species beyond counting. But they had never faced humanity. Direct hits, Wells reported, her voice shaking with something between fear and triumph. Multiple targets damaged. They're actually damaged. Allowed himself a small smile. Then let's keep hitting them. The battle became chaos. The Hollow recovered from their shock and counterattacked. They flowed around the human missiles, adapting to the kinetic impactors, learning to predict the antimatter torpedoes. Ships began to die. The destroyer HSS Montreal vanished in a flash of unmaking. The carrier HSS Pacific was torn apart from the inside as hollow entities materialized within its hull. But for every human ship that fell, the Hollow lost more of their number. Human weapons continued to find their marks. Nuclear fire burned away the shadows. Kinetic impacts shattered the impossible geometries. Antimatter explosions left wounds in the fabric of the enemy that did not heal. The elder race survivors watched in disbelief. For millions of years, they had considered themselves the masters of warfare. They had developed weapons of incredible sophistication. They had created strategies of beautiful complexity, and all of it had failed against the Hollow. But the humans, with their crude nuclear bombs and their simple kinetic projectiles and their brute force antimatter explosions, were actually fighting, actually winning. A commander opened a channel to, "How?" it asked, its translator barely able to convey its confusion. "How are your weapons working when ours cannot?" Fired another spread of missiles before answering. "Because your weapons were designed to be elegant, efficient, clean." He watched another hollow entity dissolve under nuclear fire. "Our weapons were designed by people who spent generations trying to destroy each other. We didn't want elegant. We wanted devastation. We wanted overkill. We wanted weapons that would break reality itself if we told them to." He paused as the Defiance shuddered under a glancing blow. "The Hollow exist outside normal physics. Your sophisticated weapons couldn't touch them because they were too refined. But nuclear explosions don't care about physics. Kinetic impactors don't care about dimensions. Antimatter doesn't care about impossible geometries. We just throw enough raw destruction at a problem until it goes away." The battle raged for 18 hours. The human fleet was reduced from 600 ships to 200. The elder race survivors were nearly gone, but the Hollow advance had stopped. For the first time in their endless hunger, they had found something that refused to be eaten. As the Hollow began to withdraw, regrouping for another assault, broadcast to all remaining ships. "All vessels fall back to the Sol system. Earth's orbital defenses will provide cover." He looked at the devastation around him, the floating debris, the cooling fires, the empty spaces where ships had been. "We hurt them. We actually hurt them. That means we can beat them." Lieutenant Commander Wells approached him as the fleet began its retreat. "Sir, we lost 2/3 of our forces. The Hollow will be back, and there are more of them than we can count." "I know," watched the nebula fade as the Defiance jumped to hyperspace. "But now we know something they don't expect us to know. They can be killed. And if something can be killed, humanity will find a way to kill it." Behind them, the Hollow gathered their wounded and their dead, things that had never happened to them before. They had come to this galaxy expecting easy prey. They had found something else entirely. They had found humanity. And for the first time in their eternal existence, the Hollow knew something like fear. Earth had become a fortress. General Sophia stood at the window of the old United Nations building in Geneva, looking up at a sky that no longer looked like home. Orbital defense platforms dotted the darkness like angry stars. Ships patrolled in constant formations. Energy shields flickered at the edge of the atmosphere, barely visible but always present. Humanity's was the last free planet in the galaxy. Everything else had fallen to the hollow, or had been abandoned in the desperate retreat to defend the cradle of the species. 8 billion humans and perhaps a million survivors of the elder races huddled together on this single world, waiting for the storm to return. Today, the survivors had gathered in the old assembly hall. Representatives of species that had once ruled the galaxy sat in chairs designed for human bodies, their forms awkward and broken and humbled. The queen, last of her kind, clicked softly to herself. The collective, reduced to a dozen crystal fragments, pulsed with fatting light. And High Counselor, once a being of radiant glory, now flickered like a candle in a strong wind. General turned to face them. She had been asked to explain something. Something the elder races could not understand despite their millions of years of wisdom. "You want to know how we knew," she said. It was not a question. Diminished form rippled. "We have existed for longer than your planet has been solid. We have explored the universe while your ancestors were single cells in a warm ocean. We have knowledge beyond your comprehension." The light flickered with something like shame. "Yet you saw the danger when we did not. You prepared when we laughed. How?" Walked to the center of the room. She had thought about this question for months. She had discussed it with philosophers and historians and soldiers who had survived the Battle of Nebula. The answer was simple, but it was not easy. "Because we remember," she said. The elder races stirred, confused. "We remember what it was like to be afraid. We remember what it was like to be prey." Looked at each of them in turn. "Your species became powerful so long ago that you forgot the lessons of your youth. You built civilizations that spanned galaxies. You conquered every challenge. You made yourselves safe." She paused. "Humanity was never safe. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every day. Predators hunted us. Diseases ravaged us. The climate changed and froze us and burned us and drowned us. And when we finally conquered our world, we turned on each other." The queen made a sound of disgust. "Yes, your violence, your wars. We considered this a sign of your primitiveness." "It was," agreed. "But it was also our teacher. Do you know what we learned from 10,000 years of killing each other? We learned what predators look like. We learned to recognize threats before they struck. We learned that the universe does not care about your sophistication or your wisdom or your ancient knowledge. The universe only cares about survival." She activated a holographic display. Images appeared in the air. Human history unfolding in all its terrible glory. Plagues that killed millions. Wars that burned continents. Weapons that could destroy everything humanity had built. And through it all, humanity surviving, adapting, refusing to die. "The Black Death killed half of Europe. We survived. World wars tore our civilization apart twice in a single century. We survived. We built nuclear weapons that could end all life on our planet, and we came within minutes of using them. We survived." She looked at the fatting form of. "We survived because we never forgot that survival requires constant vigilance. We never let ourselves believe we were safe." The collective pulsed. "But how did you know about the hollow specifically? Our calculations showed no threat." "Because your calculations were based on what you knew. You assumed that any threat would follow rules you understood. You assumed that the universe was fundamentally ordered and safe." Shook her head. "We assumed the opposite. We assumed that somewhere something horrible was waiting. We didn't know what it was or when it would come, but we knew it would come eventually." She walked to a different display and brought up the plans for Project Prometheus. "For the past 6 months, while you were dying, we were studying the hollow. We captured fragments of them during the battle. We analyzed their patterns. We found their weakness." The elder races leaned forward, desperate hope in their alien eyes. "The hollow are not physical beings. They are concepts, ideas, patterns of anti-existence that feed on ordered thought. They consume minds because minds are patterns and patterns are their food." Highlighted a section of the display. "But patterns can be disrupted. If we can create enough chaos, enough disorder, enough pure random noise, we can starve them, make them weak enough to destroy permanently." Hal asked, "How do you create such chaos?" "By doing what humanity does best, by breaking things, by destroying things, by unleashing forces that cannot be predicted or controlled." Looked grim. "We need to collapse the shroud rift from the inside, send ships carrying payloads designed to destabilize reality itself. When they detonate, the rift will seal, and the hollow will be trapped on the other side, cut off from this galaxy forever." The Queen understood before the others. "A suicide mission. Those ships will not return." "No, they won't." Silence filled the hall. The elder races looked at each other, and for the first time they truly understood humanity. This young species, this violent and primitive and fearful species, had not just prepared for danger. They had prepared to sacrifice everything to stop it. Slight steadied. "Then we must volunteer. The elder races caused this catastrophe by ignoring your warning. We should be the ones to close the rift." Had expected this? No. No, General, we owe humanity a debt that cannot be repaid. Our pride, our arrogance, our certainty. It destroyed our civilizations and nearly destroyed yours. Let us make amends. "This isn't about debt," said. "It's about capability. The mission requires crews who can function under impossible stress, who can face certain death and keep working, who can stare into the abyss and spit in its eye." She met's flickering gaze. "With respect, High Counselor, your species never learned how to do that. You never had to. Humanity did." The Queen clicked angrily. "You think us cowards. I think you're brave, but bravery isn't enough. You need something else. Something that only comes from generations of facing death and refusing to surrender." Smiled, but there was no joy in it. "You need to be stubborn enough to fight even when there's no hope, angry enough to keep going when everything tells you to give up, human enough to look at the impossible and say, 'Let's try anyway.'" She turned to address all of them. "Humanity started this fight. We warned you and you didn't listen. Now we'll finish it. Not because we want glory or revenge, but because this is what we do. We face the darkness. We fight the monsters. We survive or we die trying." The elder races said nothing. There was nothing to say. For millions of years, they had looked down on humanity as violent children, too primitive to understand the universe. Now they understood that this violence, this primitiveness, this endless struggle for survival had made humanity into something they could never be. Something that could save them all. Light dimmed further, but their voice was strong. "What do you need from us?" "Everything," said. "Every ship, every weapon, every piece of knowledge you have. The assault on the rift will require the combined forces of every surviving species. Humanity will lead the way, but we'll need you to follow." For the first time in its existence, the Galactic Concord voted to follow a younger species into battle. The vote was unanimous. Earth began its final preparations. The fleet assembled. Volunteers stepped forward for the suicide mission, knowing they would never return. Humanity was going to close the door that should never have been opened. And they were going to make sure it stayed closed forever. The shroud rift hung in space like a wound in reality. It was larger now than when it had first opened, fed by the countless worlds it had consumed, the trillions of minds it had devoured. Through its swirling darkness, the shapes of the hollow moved in endless hunger, waiting for the last free world to fall. Admiral stood on the bridge of the HSS Defiance, surrounded by his crew for the final time. The ship had been repaired after the Battle of Nebula, but the scars remained. Scars on the hull, scars on the crew, scars that would never fully heal. Around him, the combined fleet of every surviving species hung in formation. Human warships formed the core, bristling with weapons that had proven they could hurt the impossible. Swarm ships clustered in protective patterns. The calculation sphere pulsed with determination. Refugee vessels from a dozen dead civilizations waited to play their part. And at the center of the fleet, 100 ships carried the payloads that would end this war. Compressed matter bombs designed to collapse reality itself. chaos generators that would poison the rift with pure disorder, weapons that humanity had built for one purpose, to close the door and lock it forever. "Admiral," Lieutenant Commander Wells said quietly, "all ships report ready. The suicide wing is in position." Nodded. He had selected the crews himself. Volunteers, every one of them. Men and women who knew they would not return, who had written final letters to loved ones, who had made peace with their deaths. They were the best humanity had to offer, and they were about to give everything for a galaxy that had laughed at them. "Open a channel to the fleet," said. The communication systems hummed. Every ship, every species, every survivor listened as the human admiral spoke. "This is Admiral. In a few minutes, we will begin our assault on the Shroud Rift. Our objective is simple: get the suicide wing through the enemy lines and into the rift itself. Once inside, they will detonate their payloads and collapse the aperture permanently." He paused. "I won't lie to you. Most of us won't survive this battle. The Hollow are massing their forces for a final push. They know what we're planning, and they will do everything they can to stop us. But they've never faced a combined fleet before. They've never faced species who have put aside their differences to fight for survival." He looked at his crew, at the faces of people who had become his family over months of desperate warfare. "The elder races asked me why humanity was willing to sacrifice so much for a galaxy that dismissed us. The answer is simple: because this is who we are. We don't fight because we think we'll win. We fight because fighting is the only choice that matters. We fight because somewhere, a child is sleeping peacefully on Earth, and they deserve to grow up in a universe without monsters." He took a deep breath. "Today, we close the door. Today, we save what's left of this galaxy. Today, we prove that the species who warned you, the species you laughed at, the species you called primitive and violent and afraid, was right all along." His voice hardened. "All ships begin the assault." The battle for the Shroud Rift was the most terrible conflict in galactic history. The Hollow emerged from the darkness in numbers beyond counting. They tore through space like living shadows, consuming everything they touched. Ships vanished in flashes of unmaking. Crews screamed as their minds were devoured. Reality bent and twisted around the impossible geometries of the enemy. But the combined fleet pushed forward. Human nuclear weapons blazed trails of fire through the Hollow ranks. Kinetic impactors punched holes in their formations. Antimatter explosions burned away the shadows. And beside them, the elder races fought with everything they had left, no longer sophisticated or elegant, but desperate and determined, and finally learning what survival truly required. The suicide wing advanced through the chaos. Ship by ship, they fell. The HSS Prometheus was torn apart, protecting the carrier behind it. The HSS Icarus flew directly into a hollow formation and detonated its antimatter cores, taking 1,000 enemies with it. The HSS Phoenix, engines failing, used its last energy to clear a path for the ships behind it. Admiral watched them die. He watched humanity die. And he felt something beyond grief, beyond anger, beyond fear. He felt proud. "Admiral," Wells said, her voice cracking, "we've lost 60% of the suicide wing, but the lead ships are approaching the rift. Then we make sure they get through." The Defiance accelerated to maximum speed, drove his flagship into the thickest concentration of Hollow, firing everything he had. Around him, other ships followed, forming a living shield around the remaining suicide vessels. "Get them through," roared. "Whatever it takes, get them through." The lead ship, the HSS Sacrifice, reached the edge of the rift. Its commander, Captain, the same ambassador who had warned the Conquered a year ago, sent one final transmission. "This is Sacrifice. We're going in. Tell Earth we did our job. Tell them we were ready when it mattered." The Sacrifice plunged into the rift, followed by 11 other ships. They disappeared into the swirling darkness, carrying the weapons that would end the war. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the rift began to scream. The collapse started at the edges, reality folding in on itself like paper crumpling in a fire. The hollow inside tried to flee, but the chaos generators did their work, filling the dimensional space with pure disorder, starving them, weakening them, trapping them. The compressed matter bombs detonated, and the rift began to close. Watched as the wound in space shrank. The hollow still in normal space went mad with rage and fear, throwing themselves at the fleet in suicidal fury. More ships died, more crews were lost, but it didn't matter anymore. The rift was closing. Admiral Wells whispered, "It's working. It's actually working." Nodded. Blood ran down his face from a wound he didn't remember receiving. The Defiance was falling apart around him, but none of that mattered. "Broadcast to all ships," he said. "Tell them to pull back, get everyone clear of the collapse." He didn't follow his own order. The Defiance stayed in position, continuing to fire, continuing to fight, giving the surviving ships time to escape. As the rift shrank to a point of impossible light, sent one final message. "Tell them we held the line. Tell them we were ready when it mattered. And tell them, next time someone warns you about monsters, maybe listen." The rift collapsed. The remaining hollow, cut off from their dimension, withered and died, unable to sustain themselves without the connection to their home. The Defiance, caught in the edge of the collapse, was torn apart. Admiral died saving the galaxy. 1 year later, the new Galactic Concord assembled on Earth. Representatives of every surviving species gathered in the rebuilt United Nations Hall, now expanded to accommodate beings of all forms and sizes. Humanity sat at the head of the council, not because they demanded it, but because the elder races insisted. General Sophia stood before the assembly. Behind her, a holographic display showed the stars, peaceful now, recovering slowly from the devastation. "We lost much," she said. "Billions of lives, countless worlds, species that will never exist again. The price was terrible, and it will take generations to heal." She paused. "But we survived. We survived because when the darkness came, we remembered what the elder races had forgotten. The universe is not safe. It never was. It never will be. Survival requires vigilance, sacrifice, and the willingness to face the monsters that hide in the void." She looked at the elder races, no longer ancient masters but equals. "You asked us once how we knew, how we saw the danger when you did not. The answer is simple. We remembered our fear. We remembered our struggle. We never let ourselves believe we were beyond danger." She smiled. "That's the lesson of humanity. Not that we're stronger or smarter or better, but that we never forget how close we are to extinction, and that fear keeps us ready." High Counselor, rebuilt now, their light steady and strong, rose to address the assembly. "The Conquered recognizes humanity not as junior members but as equals in all things. More than equals, as teachers. We forgot what survival required. You reminded us." They bowed, a gesture of profound respect. "We are grateful." The new Galactic Concord began its work, rebuilding, remembering, preparing for threats that might never come but could never be ignored. And in the Great Hall of Earth, a plaque was mounted on the wall. It bore the names of every ship, every crew member who had died closing the Shroud Rift. At the bottom, in letters that could be read in any language, was a simple message. "They laughed at the warning. They will never laugh again." Somewhere in the peaceful darkness between stars, a child on Earth looked up at the sky and dreamed of the future. A future that existed because humanity had been ready when it mattered. A future earned in blood and fire and sacrifice. A future that would never forget.